Good evening, dear Medyascope viewers. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. This week, we'll be talking about the economic impacts of the pandemic in Turkey. Professor Kaya Ardıç will be with us. But first, let's take a look at this week's developments. As of April 16th, Turkey's death toll from the coronavirus rose to a total of 1,643. And the country's total number of confirmed cases rose to 74,193, according to the Health Minister Fahrettin Koca. Here are some of the coronavirus-related developments of the week.
Turkish Interior Ministry on April 10th imposed a two-day curfew in 31 large cities, including Istanbul, Ankara and Izmir, in response to the spread of COVID-19. The sudden announcement led to panic, with crowds rushing to markets and bakeries and flouting social distancing advice. About 1 hour after the initial circular came a second notice, detailing the exemptions of the curfew, saying bakeries, petrol stations, pharmacies and health facilities would be allowed to stay open during the curfew. Several members of the opposition parties have criticized the government for announcing the decision of a 48-hour curfew only 2 hours left to lockdown. Further, Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu said the municipality was not notified of this decision and such unilateral sudden decisions result in panic. The decision of curfew should not be taken all of a sudden. As the Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality, we have not been notified of this critical decision. We do not even know which of the services we will be providing tomorrow in Istanbul. Every decision which is not given with a common mind and cooperation only causes confusion and panic, İmamoğlu said. Moreover, Health Minister Fahrettin Koca was reportedly also not aware of the decision to impose a two-day curfew, according to Daily Sözcü. Members of the Health Ministry's Science Commission were also reportedly not notified of the curfew beforehand, prompting them to hand their resignations to Koca. According to the Daily, Koca managed to persuade the scientists to not quit. President Erdogan announced that Turkey will continue to implement weekend curfews. The next curfew will be on April 18th and 19th. Agriculture Minister Bekir Pakdemirli said that workers in the agriculture and stock breeding sectors will be exempted from a 48-hour lockdown in order to avoid any problems in the food supply or production lines in the agriculture and livestock sectors. Those that work in the production of short shelf-life produces, such as meat, fish, fruits, vegetables and dairy products, as well as the flour and pasta sectors, will continue working over the weekend, he added. 3 inmates in Turkey's open prisons have died from COVID-19, while 17 others were diagnosed with the virus, Justice Minister Abdülhamit Gül said. Gül noted that all of the cases were detected in open prisons, where inmates are not kept in cells and are instead allowed to work, and that no inmates were diagnosed with COVID-19 in Turkey's closed prisons. The minister also said that 14 judges and prosecutors had tested positive for COVID-19, as well as 32 courthouse employees and 79 employees of correctional facilities. Turkish Airlines announced that the company would continue the suspension of international flights until May 20th. The company's domestic flights had previously been halted until April 20th, which will remain the same until further notice. Turkish Airlines pilot Serdar Gündoğdu died from the coronavirus in Istanbul on April 15th, the third of the company's pilots to pass away from the disease. Turkish Airlines pilots Mehmet Ali Kılıç and Mustafa Türkon also died from the disease. Turkey, meanwhile, sent medical aid to 5 Balkan countries, including Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Kosovo, as well as Italy, Spain, and the UK, the countries in Europe worst hit by the virus. Turkey will be sending more medical aid to Israel and Palestine to help them battle coronavirus, presidential spokesman İbrahim Kalın said. He added that Armenia's medicine demand was also approved by President Erdogan.
This evening, we have Professor Kaya Ardıç with us. Professor Ardıç teaches economics at Piri Reis University here in Istanbul. Good evening, Professor Ardıç. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Good evening, Şişirin Hanım. Thank you to having me.
So, Professor Ardıç, this financial crisis that we are currently going through is different from previous ones because it is threatening the health and lives of individuals around the world. Since there is currently no vaccine, and keeping in mind the limited capacity of hospitals, the primary solution to curb the spread of the virus has been the implementation of social distancing. So this shutdown has brought the economy to the brink of a complete halting. What will be the long-term economic effects of such a standstill, and how do you envision companies and their employees will be affected, have been affected so far and will be affected in the days to come?
Okay, everybody talks about the COVID-19 and its economic, social, political effects, negative effects on the countries, and particularly on the economy. But it is not obvious what will be the magnitude and the deepness of this impact, negative impact. Certainly, as you said, there will be very deep and negative impact on the economies, starting from the certain sector, like you emphasized, for example, tourism, for example, transportation, logistics, etc. This crisis there is a semblance with this coronavirus crisis, let's say it, name it, and between this crisis and the crisis of 2008 global financial crisis, 2008. There is a semblance, but there are different. There are different, not the same kind of crisis, because at the 2008, there was no COVID-19. There was no such deep human health, serious human health problem. So this crisis has two separate, but of course very related impacts, threats on the economy. One, first of all, of course, on human health, human lives, and on the way of the health of people to struggle against the crisis, against the illness. People fear very much. People feel a lot of illness, and they leave very negative effects. For example, the cessation of the normal activities, the separation, isolation problem, etc. And on the other hand, of course, there are very serious systemic earthquake behind of all this crisis. Because if we don't take into consideration this side of the problem, systemic problem, coming from the nature and the structure of the economic system, on other words, from market economy or capitalism. Because, okay, in the crisis of 2008, there was no coronavirus problem, but it was a crisis, very serious crisis, since the Great Depression 1929. It was the most serious crisis, 2008 crisis. But now with COVID-19 in 2020, this year, there is different dimension we have beyond of this crisis. It is that, for example, to stand and then to solve the crisis in 2008 crisis, central banks and government printed millions and trillions dollars of mountain range of money, and just to solve the crisis, stop the crisis, and applying only monetary policies, But now everybody understands that this crisis is not solvable, yes. It is not solvable by only monetary policies, because printing money and throwing them to the companies don't solve the problem, because there are two sectors in the economy. On the one side, one sector, it is a virtual distinction, real sector. On the other side, the financial sector, monetary sector. So the basic question in the economy is to realize this equilibrium between these two sectors. But the financial sector is much more, is greater than the real sector. The volume and magnitude of the financial sector. For example, let me give you an example, numerical example. The global economy GDP, global economy total GDP, is calculated approximately, grosso modo, $80 billion. $80 billion. But the volume of the financial markets total assets in 1 year is greater than $90 billion. So there is a huge disequilibrium between real sector and the financial sector. This paradox, this disequilibrium, economically speaking, is the key factor to understand the crisis. Systemic crisis it is an earthquake, systemic earthquake, but the capitalism and the global economy has always this kind of contradictions between production and consumption. Because when the financial assets and the volume of the financial sector attempt the very high, huge level, there are more expenditure, there is more consumption than production sometimes. And sometimes just the opposite, there are more production than the consumption. So it is not easy to realize, to reach this equilibrium, but this disequilibrium creates some problems, because people live in the real sector, not only in financial sector. In the financial sector, you can create richest. There was a virus, I think virus, was computer virus. And to resolve, to find a solution to this kind of contradiction, unfortunately not possible in the capitalist system, in the global economy, because every countries, even China and Russia included, all countries now try in some way this economic system, market system. But the market system has some troubles coming from this basic contradiction of the system. So COVID-19, for example, COVID-19 now just accelerated, deepened this contradiction. So the crisis of 2020, or COVID-19 crisis, let's say, is not the same with 2008 crisis. So we see the problems in our daily life, on the daily lives, and primarily health system. The health of the people is in big danger. People die, unfortunately, and this epidemic will damage at great magnitude the economies of all around the world.
So, you mentioned some of the actions taken by the central banks in 2008. Can you perhaps explain what has happened in that sense in Turkey this time around? And how do you evaluate, for example, the actions of the central bank here as opposed to other countries, and whether there's sufficient measures or not in guaranteeing support for the wider populace?
Exactly. In the 2008 crisis, Turkey followed this, the same way. The other economies, because the central bank has applied expansionary monetary policy. I mean, printing money and giving the credits like now, and coming from the particularity of the Turkish economy, as our president Recep Erdogan said, this crisis Turkey surmounted very easily and without big damage. Of course, in the two quarters, there has been negative minus growth rate, but after third and fourth quarter, Turkish economy restarted quickly. It is a particularity of the Turkish economy. Easily goes to the crisis and quickly coming up, back up from the crisis. Let's hope that this time too, if we find the right way to apply in the economy particularly, and in the health system, I think it will be not so catastrophic the coming days for Turkey. we understand there is a big debate between economists, but we understand that traditional economic policies, particularly priority of the monetary policies, are not sufficient to solve the problem. Because if there is no simultaneously equilibrium between fiscal policy and monetary policy, you can't solve the problems. And privatization, the privatization of the, for example, health system, private hospital, private health system, is a good example. We understand, everybody understand, we leave it, but health system doesn't help, doesn't save human lives. Very expensive and inefficient. Now everybody understand the importance of the public health system. But unfortunately, the public health system is not very developed, very rich, but people goes to public hospital and the public wait the help from the public health service. So privatization in education, in health, etc., not the solution, the magic solution of the economic problems. When human life is about, when is question is the human life. Of course, public health system, even it is not sufficient, it is not very developed, not very well organized, is very important. So we have to change the path of the economic policy. We have to give some priority for the public intervention, public regulation, and the importance of the public health and public health system, for example, and the education too is the same. I know very well the problems of the education. And if not, if we continue to make the same mistakes, unfortunately, the crisis will be deeper and disastrous.
Professor Ardıç, there have been several measures taken in order to kind of reassure people and provide them promises in order to appease anxieties, you know, in terms of future job guarantees and income guarantee, what with so many workplaces having shut down, so many sectors.
Literally, unfortunately.
Yeah, so do you find these economic provisions and promises, you know, announced by our government sufficient in order to appease these anxieties, or I mean, are people, you know, rightfully to be concerned about their future incomes and job guarantees?
Unfortunately, I don't think that the measures taken from Turkish government, if you ask me this particularly, so are not sufficient, because all the measures, economic measures taken until now, have given the priority to the financial sector, as I said a few minutes ago. So the real economy, of course, certain manufacture and certain industrial companies, okay, but the amount, it started, as you know, with 100 billion Turkish lira, the first package. The first package is not, it was not very sufficient. And after then, central bank and the government have taken different measure, particularly some credit facility to industrial, but for the labor, and for the poor people that their income level is very low, there is not enough measures, I think, at my sense, because jobless unemployment rate in Turkey is very high compared to emerging markets. And of course, there has been a cut in the economic blockchains, logistically speaking, between production and consumption and transportation. And some activities are completely stopped, like airlines, air traffic, and transportation, airlines, transportation, tourism, nearly. For example, just an example. For example, for this year, according to economic program, $34 billion will come from tourism sector. From tourism now stopped. So grosso modo zero income tourism income. So it is a big disadvantage, a big loss. It's a very big loss. So I think government must do some extra measures, apply some extra measures to defend, first of all, agriculture sector, so the unemployment rate high. So, for example, must give some cash help, social aid to these people, because, for example, for a barber has shut down his magazine. So with zero income, government can't collect the taxes from these people. A lot of, how do you say in Turkish, esnaf and free owner of their job. Yeah. In English, I don't remember exactly esnaf, so the word esnaf. So this category of working
business owners, small business owners, maybe.
Small business, yes, small business, exactly. Thank you very much. So the life will be tougher for this kind of people, small business workers on the factories, functioner, officer of the state, etc. And of course, retired people.
Professor Ardıç, you did mention certain sectors such as transportation and tourism, which will be the sectors the most perhaps heavily damaged from this economic standstill. How do you think, these should probably be the sectors prioritized. And you mentioned also that certain extra measures should be taken by the government in order to allow these sectors to recover. So can you perhaps summarize some of these measures that can be taken in order to facilitate recovery?
Government can help to these sectors like tourism, transportation, with the fiscal policy. For example, cutting their tax and stopping their tax for some period, for 3 months or 6 months or maybe longer. So other measures, monetary help, monetary transfers to these sectors, and try to stop unemployment rate at a certain level. It is clear, it is unfortunately, it is obvious that unemployment rate will be very, very great. We hope that it will be very provisionary, very not for long
limited
time.
in terms of time, yeah.
Yes, certain time. Certain part of this unemployed, of course, will return to their jobs, but certain part will not, unfortunately. So it is very grave, very serious problem. Unemployed people. Inflation maybe in this under this condition will be not too high because there is no demand. There is a terrible decrease on the demand side, and no enough consumption, no enough production. So totally, the price level will not be very high. Probably it is maybe and positive sides, but unemployment problem is not like the inflation. Must be priority. Must take the priority from the government.
Professor Kaya Ardıç, thank you so much for having joined us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan has rejected Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu's resignation. Soylu had announced his resignation on Twitter following criticism of his decision to announce a 2-day curfew against the coronavirus pandemic just 2 hours before it began.
Soylu announced a 2-day curfew at around 10 p.m. on April 10th, prompting thousands to go out on the streets to purchase food, despite calls to stay home to curb the spread of the highly contagious virus. The scenes of overcrowded bakeries and supermarkets were widely shared on social media, with many slamming the ruling Justice and Development Party (AKP) for paving the way for such an incident that completely disregarded social distancing, wasting the month-long efforts to curb the spread of the virus. During this process that has been carried out meticulously, the responsibility of this weekend-long curfew is mine with all its aspects. The scene that occurred in the beginning, even though for a limited time, were not in line with this perfectly handled process, Soylu said in a tweet. My countless experiences shouldn't have led to such scenes in this incident that we are responsible for. It was a step taken with good intentions to halt the spread of the virus on the weekend, he also said. Following Erdoğan's decision to reject his resignation, Soylu deleted his previous tweet and said that he was humbled by the attitude of the people and the president. The holder of an office has the discretion to resign, but the final decision belongs to our president. Our interior minister's resignation has not been accepted. He will continue his duty, Presidential Communications Directorate said. Süleyman Soylu, who was appointed as the interior minister in the immediate aftermath of the July 15, 2016 coup attempt, has earned the appreciation of our nation for his successful work to date, it said.
The Turkish parliament passed a bill early on April 14th aimed at reducing the sentences of thousands of prisoners, paving the way for their release amid the coronavirus outbreak.
The bill, drafted by the ruling AKP and its ally MHP, was supported by 279 lawmakers in the 600-seat chamber, while 51 voted against it. The law will halve the sentence issued to inmates, except for those behind bars, over charges related to terrorism, drugs, violence against women and children, sexual abuse, and deliberate murder. The legal amendments will enable home confinement for some inmates over 65, women who have children aged 6 and under, and sick prisoners who cannot take care of themselves. It will also bring measures for inmates with communicable diseases. Among those released was Alaaddin Çakıcı, a notorious mafia leader. Çakıcı, who had been in jail for 16 years, was released from the Sincan prison in the capital Ankara. Çakıcı's life shines a bright light on the ties between the deep state and organized crime, as well as the Nationalist Movement Party and the mafia. The bill has been criticized by the opposition and human rights groups for its exclusion of prisoners who are jailed for their political opinions. Engin Özkoç, a deputy from the main opposition Republican People's Party, has said the party will challenge the new prisoner release law in Turkey's top court. This law is against the concept of equality. The scales in the hands of justice should be balanced. If a discrimination is undertaken, the balance of the scales is broken. Just because a person is an academic and speaks in favor of peace, just because a person is against the government, they will be kept in prison. But then those who are serving their sentences for offenses which I have just indicated will be released, he said. The parliament passed another bill to protect health workers from violence. Under the law, penalties for threatening, insulting, injuring, or hindering healthcare workers from doing their duties are increased by a half. Health Minister Fahrettin Koca had last week urged the lawmakers to introduce the law in an attempt to provide moral support for the medical staff, saying he was expecting a yes vote from every member of the parliament.
A boycott against Netflix on Twitter was launched after a hint that one of the main characters of the new Turkish series Love 101 is gay.
A boycott against the streaming service Netflix took place on Twitter when an internet troll posted that the new Turkish series Love 101 would have an LGBTQ character. The hashtag Netflix Adamol, Netflix Be a Man, became a trending topic on Twitter on April 8th. Further, the chairman of the Radio and Television Supreme Council, Ebu Bekir Şahin, said, "Our red lines are obvious. We are determined not to give way to immorality." Media Ombudsman Faruk Bildirici commented on Şahin's discriminatory statement regarding the series Love 101 to one of Turkey's LGBT rights organizations, Kaos GL. He said, "Their work is to impose their own moral understanding on the whole public. When I was a member of Rütük, I was constantly objecting to this mindset. Because with this mindset in charge, they will want to keep the on-demand platforms and radio TV broadcasts on the internet on a tight leash." Love 101, set to be released on April 24th, will be the third Turkish drama released by Netflix in 3 years, having previously made and distributed The Protector and The Gift.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. See you next Friday at 8 p.m. Good night.